All right, good morning, guys. So the recording has started. As we've just discussed today, we will be doing special considerations. Before we start, as always, please, wherever possible, please ask questions, raise your hands. If you don't want to say it out loud, you can type it in the chat. Um, but please, let us just ask questions, let's put ourselves out there. And as I always say, guys, you know, this is an opportunity for you to really, accelerate yourself, into a profession or just knowledge or whatever the case may be. Health and wellness, I'm a firm believer, is the main base structure of the pyramid of health across the world. If more people can just be active, know basic information about nutrition, basic principles about training and health and wellness, there would be far less people taking up space in hospitals, far less people needing to go to the doctor, and far less, unhealthy individuals. If we just knew basic principles of health and wellness, and that's where you guys can come in. So please don't think that this is just a qualification that will, be able to get you into Virgin Active, Planet Fitness, Gold's Gym, whatever the case may be. But this is also something that you can use to influence people's lives for the better. So please don't just see the short-term view of it, but also look at the long-term view of how you can influence and change other people's lives should you choose to do so. Right. So today we're going to be doing special considerations. Now, this is going to be a slightly different lecture to what we normally do. And today we're going to be covering stress management, physical and psychological well-being, environmental factors, 21st century clients, injuries, age-specific training, and then an approach on disabilities. Today is going to be more of a discussion. There's mainly just a discussion around these bits. You will notice when you consult the textbook, there's not as much literature on it. It's mainly more just discussing the anecdotal evidence that we've seen, but also just understanding what's what. All right. So, any questions regarding this? None. Everyone in agreement that this is what we're going to be doing today.
Yes.
Cool beans. Cool beans. All right. Now, when we look at stress management, let's just look at how we look at this. Now, we're going to look at the front line of it, and then we're also going to be able to dive in and have more of a conversation around it. And what I really want to focus on here is how science wants us to look at this, right? And now, when I say science wants to look at this doesn't necessarily mean that everything that is written in a scientific journal is A, the gospel, and B, 100% true. It is the evidence that they find, remember, is dependent on the sample group that they use and the response thereof. So when we look at this is not to say that now every single person has to do this, but this is just putting us in the ballpark for how we can assume or hypothesize most people will probably respond. So when we look at stress management, the four various different events that most people would need to go through is you first need to accept, then you identify, then after identifying, you identify and eliminate the specific, influences, and then there's an element of communication. Now, when we look at that, I think especially looking at from a brain point of view, how many times do we look at various different stress factors and we choose to ignore them? Whether we choose to ignore, maybe it's a boss that maybe isn't the most opening and, cheerful individual, to maybe a situation that genuinely causes us stress that we don't want to acknowledge. I mean, one that's a glaringly obvious one, I think, for a lot of people is finances, especially in the financial landscape. How many people actually accept that, look, they maybe aren't in the best financial position? And it's this continuous, like, negative feedback circle whereby the more we choose to ignore it, the more when it comes back, it just has a greater response because, we're choosing to ignore it. So it has a bigger hold on us rather than looking at it and be like, right, this is a problem. Let me acknowledge it. How can I sort it out? And how can I move on? And especially when you look at the training landscape, whether you're coaching an athlete, whether you're coaching a general population individual, whatever the case may be, you have no initial idea on where they are coming from. And what I mean by that is you never know where what situation that person's coming from. If you're coaching someone in the gym, that hour that they come to you as a coach or a trainer, that hour could be their hour of or hour and a half of relaxation, an hour of peace, an hour that they have chosen to give to themselves. So you never really know what stress that they are going under, or enduring at that present moment in time. They could be someone who, you know, is the CEO or an executive of a company, and it's up to them to make sure that the company is sustainable, profitable, because they have staff beneath them who they need to pay. You never know the stress that they may be. Or maybe you have someone who's a single mom of three who works two jobs, you know, well, whatever the case may be, because that's what they do. Or maybe you have a father who, you know, provides for not just his immediate family, but for his external family as well, for argument's sake. You never really know where these people are coming from. Even if you're working with younger people, you cannot look at one specific situation and apply your response across the board, because we as humans are just far too complex. We are just far too different to look at it or to look at stress as black and white. And that's probably where the mental health conversation needs to start, is that we are far too used to looking at our own situation, and God willing, we've gotten ourselves out of a situation or two of stress, and we take our approach, and now that must be the same approach for someone else. Each person's neurological approach or process, granted there may be similar, you know lines or mechanisms of action, from a neurological point of view, but their approach and how they deal with it is arguably unique in every single individual, in every single situation. So it is important to look at that. um it's important to look at each of those, that accept, that identify and eliminate, and then communicate through that. Is, if you look at, a big circle, right? And if you have one big situation called stress, let's identify what are the main parts. And then from there, we can go down. Okay, cool. Now that we've identified the main part, what is that specific part? What are we've now identified, let's say, I don't know, let's say work for most people. So they're stressed about work. So now you've identified. Now, what within work do you need to identify that is causing a problem? So you identify the 5 things that are causing you a problem or stress for at work. How can you identify those problems and then eliminate the causation of those problems, and then communicate that so you understand why? What are you trying to do? Communicate that to yourself, communicate that maybe to your boss, communicate that to a family member or someone who supports you, to be able for you to actually verbalize what you are trying to do, and not just keep it all internal. That's a very good and important point. Then when we look at our inflow and outflow factors, you have internal and external forms of stress. Not necessarily everything has to be an external form of stress. And when we think of external forms of stress, we're not just thinking of words, but situations. Um, Especially if you look at from an internal point of view, how things function from a neurological point of view. Remember, when we've chatted before, I've discussed your HPA axis, which is arguably your stress axis. And when you look at your stress axis, you have your what do you call it, your um, hypothalamus, pituitary, and adrenal axes. And when you look at that, how stress, cortisol, adrenaline, and all of those various other physiological um, processes, how they overall affect um, your functioning. And that's what people also forget from a performance standpoint, is that when your body is under an element of stress, especially fight or flight. Remember, within your brain you have your autonomic nervous system, you have your sympathetic and your parasympathetic, your sympathetic being your fight and flight, and then your parasympathetic being your rest and digest. From a stress point of view, stress is arguably the silent killer, right? When you look at people, because of the physiological outcomes that come with stress, increase in blood pressure, right? High blood pressure is terrible for your body. And most people don't know that they have it, right? Then you look at adrenaline and cortisol. What happens is when you're underneath stress for a long period of time, what happens is you have a neurological baseline or a physiological baseline. And let's say that here is the threshold for cortisol. So when your body reaches that threshold, it naturally tapers down, or your body will have various physiological events that will happen to manage or mitigate the effects of that cortisol. But what happens when you now all of a sudden have a situation that keeps you at that stress? Maybe you're a CEO or whatever, and you endure the stress day in and day out. You've raised that new threshold. So now, if you look at that, look at the difference between your initial physiological baseline and that new baseline that you have subsequently created. Now your body has to work extra hard to try and now change that. But most people end up being there because they don't know that they have had this. And your brains are so clever at dealing with the new normal that you've created for yourself. But your body has to meet your brain's requirements. So if your brain's like, okay, cool, Cameron, you now are under stress 24/7. I now need to physiologically get the body to meet your new levels of stress, be it from a nutritional intake point of view, an amino acid point of view, a neurological function point of view, blood. How are you going to get your body to continue to function and to provide that nutrient? You're going to need to increase how fast that blood can reach different areas. All of a sudden, you know, you're in a situation whereby your heart rate is elevated for prolonged periods throughout the day. Is your heart healthy enough to be able to deal with that? And a lot of the time it's these peaks and valleys, because then you go home or you then go out, you then have a couple of drinks or whatever the case may be, and it just brings you all the way back down. Then you sleep and then you wake back up again. And then as soon as you wake up, remember, cortisol peaks in the morning. So a lot of the time, if you're not getting adequate sleep, all of a sudden now your cortisol's coming in, all of these various different things. So when we look at stress, stress is not just, oh, I feel stressed. I feel stressed. Because be very careful of how you also talk to yourself in that sense, or how your clients talk about stress, or how you as a coach approach stress. Because all of a sudden, you can create a new element of normal because you've normalized that situation of stress. You've moved on, and you haven't actually dealt with the cause or how you are going to adequately deal with that stress. Can we all agree with that? Or does anyone have any disagreements? If you have any disagreements within that, you're more than welcome to raise your hand or unmute yourself and comment. Yes, Lou.
Cameron?
Yes.
I'm looking at the stress management picture that you have added here for us. I'm not sure, but to see the flow diagram, is it first to identify the stress that you're sitting with, like your internal, external factors that is influencing it, and then acceptance will come on a later stage, or is identifying in the right place there, or what advice would you give on the stress management flow when you apply?
No, look, thank you for that comment, Lou. I personally think you need to first accept. And why I say that is not just because that's the content-based response, but because as I said earlier, you don't necessarily have to follow just what literature says. But I think it's very important for the brain to first acknowledge the situation that you find yourself in before you start trying to identify stuff. Because often, if you don't accept a situation, how can you rationally identify the problems if you haven't accepted that there is a problem in that sense? So, if you put yourself in a situation whereby maybe it's a bad relationship and you accept, right, my relationship actually isn't as good as I possibly think that it is. Now that you've had an element of acceptance, you are far more likely to look at the situation from a rational point of view and be able to identify honestly, because you've accepted that state, you've accepted that problem or whatever the case may be, then you can adequately identify. But you do make a good point, and surely maybe we should identify the problem and then we can accept the problem. I think that ties into what I then said. That would be more individual specific, and also maybe more coach specific, because maybe your industry or your profession caters for identifying then accepting. Because maybe if you look at, for example, from an athlete point of view, maybe yourself as a coach, you will identify a problem, maybe for your athletes or whatever the case may be. You'll then have a discussion and then accept the identification of what you found, where you can improve or whatnot, and then you can identify and eliminate, and then you can communicate that and work forward. But I do think that there has to be an overall element of acceptance. For example, if you use the coaching scenario again, if you are a coach and you, in your case, watching an athlete perform, you first have to accept that yourself as a coach might have done something wrong, in that sense. So you can identify that, but unless you initially accept that, you're gonna have a hard time from trying to convince your brain that there is something, if that makes sense. At least that's my approach. But I do think that there is a happy medium between the two, in the sense that neither acceptance nor identification needs to 100% come first. I do think that there is an element whereby you do need to see what is best for the situation, depending on your approach. A lot of the time, I think if there's an external approach, for example, a coach identifying a problem, then if we look at the client from a stress management point of view, then acceptance would have to be that first approach for them. Because if they cannot accept what the problem that you have identified, how can they themselves in their own state identify and accept, so there is that. So I do think that those processes are definitely interchangeable, provided you know what you're trying to achieve and then move forward. I think a lot of the time people get stuck in the identification or the acceptance sphere, and that takes up a lot of energy and a lot of time, because again, our brains are so good at just cracking on with the next thing. We can know that, for example, going to bed at 1 a.m. and waking up at 4:30 a.m. and then going to work from, because you need to get there earlier, and going to gym from 5:30 until 6:30, and then you're working from 8 until 5 or 6, and then whatever the case may be, is wrong. But if you're coming home and you're working a second job now to provide more money or security for your family, and then you have no choice but to go to bed at 1, etc. As much as you can tell yourself that that is probably not the best thing, and you have identified that that's a cause of stress, or you accept that that is a situation that's causing stress, your brain will still wake up and tell you, no, but you got to get this done. And you'll very quickly motivate yourself out of that rational space that you've created, because the overarching thing is maybe wellness for your family or whatever the case may be. So it's very much, there's so many aspects that come in, that sometimes siphoning it down to one specific point, or just in this case 4 points in a flow diagram, we're probably cutting it a little bit short in terms of the true reality of the situation. But any questions on that or comments? And if you guys disagree with me, please, I'm more than happy to have a conversation. There's nowhere that says here that whatever I say is the complete truth. I could maybe view things from a different perspective. You may view things from a completely. You may look at it that communication needs to come first. Let's have that conversation. Maybe there's something that I need to change in my approach. Any comments,
Yeah,
or can I correct one? Yeah.
From my personal point of view, dealing with athletes, you know,
Yeah.
when going to the track, you always get this fee kids, fee athletes, happy, and then suddenly when the training starts, you can see the stress factor comes in, especially when they are learning new techniques. People start to get it wrong. So there's this. If I look, um, identify um, approach was identifying what they are studying, identifying the way or the attitude they come to. Um, so, uh, then psychologically to
Mm.
to
Sorry, Louis,
uh,
your voice chat is coming in and out.
giving our can you hear me better now?
Slightly
Can you
better
hear
now,
me?
yes. Yes, slightly better now. Sorry, it was a little bit muffled there for a minute or two.
Okay. With okay, so what I was saying from a personal point of view, coming to
Mm.
you know, myself as a coach always identify first the external that is attitude that comes to the track. This maybe a new implemented how they deal with getting that hour or hour and a half with me. No, as we all know, that doesn't matter what type of stress you put on the athlete, the muscle, the joints.
Mm.
It's always having an impact on the brain and the way they think, why they are. And sometimes if you have a very hard workout, some athletes but it's from this um, and it's going to be changing. So it's a nice lesson all you know, and for that, I think very good model from the coach. And for an athlete, is smart. You accept that this is going to be a challenge workout. It's going to work on your arms. It's going to work on your arms, and whatever the case may be, and identifying your weaknesses, strengths, and then eliminate whatever is going on here. So I like the model. It gives a better when you are dealing with physical, psychological barriers. And
No, for sure. No, for sure. Thank you so much for that, Louis, guys. I think that's also incredibly valid. You remember your profession and your environment will also dictate to how you mitigate as a coach the stresses that your clients or your athletes are under. Excuse me. And I also think that when we look at stress, nothing is to say that anything is too big or too small. I think we as humans have become awfully, awfully bad at telling people how big or how small their stress is. I mean, granted, there's different stress approaches that we can look at that we can then think, okay, maybe this is something that is worth stressing, or maybe in your case, Louis, there's aspects that athletes have, and you can look at them and you can say, hey, look, that's really not something you need to be stressing about. You don't worry about that, whatever the case may be. But you can't necessarily tell someone that their stress is completely invalid, if that makes sense. You know, that is not fair at all on the individual or on yourself. You know, because you never really know the extent that where that stress starts. You know, um, someone could be stressed coming to training because mom and dad have told them that, look, I'm working 3 jobs and you can't afford to get injured. We need you to win. We can't afford to just throw money at something that we can't, we don't know that there's going to be something. So there's various different stresses. So this person then comes to you and you identify something, maybe in your case, Louis, and or maybe someone comes to you and you identify something at the gym, you know, and then you say, no, don't stress about that. You don't know where that stress starts. So I also think it's very important to understand that. And if someone has raised a hand to say that, hey, maybe this or that, maybe for the duration of that training block or that training session, yes, maybe you can just put it to bed and be like, right, we can discuss the data. Let's just focus on today's workouts or whatnot. But in some cases, we maybe have to ask ourselves, is training in light of elements of stress the best response? And now what I'm saying is, I'm not saying now just because someone says, oh, I'm stressed or whatnot, now all of a sudden we don't train, or now all of a sudden we don't coach or whatever. But sometimes it may be more beneficial for an athlete or a client to go and maybe just have a light, more plyometric based session, or maybe just have a conversation. Maybe it's let's bang out some cardio. It always feels good after you've exercised a little bit. Or maybe let's just go and have a coffee. Let's just go and chat, or go do a sauna, go do an ice bath, or whatever the case may be, and let's just have a conversation. Sometimes that communication aspect and that taking the shackles off of your clients can be far more beneficial in the long run. But then again, it's all dependent on the individual. Now, let's move on to the physical and psychological well-being. Now, let's work through this. So, based on the various different points, what we can look at is you have your exercise and psychological well-being, you have exercise and anxiety, you have the coping with stress, you have exercise and depression, you have exercise and self-esteem, you have exercise as therapy, you have reasons for feelings of well-being as a result of exercise, you have the social dimensions, can be a time out, you have chemical reactions, you have the thermogenic hypothesis, you have exercise and other positive health habits, you have negative effects of exercise, you have exercise abuse, you have overtraining and staleness, and then you also have emotional breakdowns. And what's important to look at all of these physical and psychological well-beings. This isn't a flow diagram to show, this is the order in which people go. That's not that at all. This merely depicts various different things that can be a response or a psychological approach to training. Now, if we look at this, I mean, we don't have to necessarily go into everything specific, but it's more just to look at, the various different places in where exercise is exposed or different approaches to exercise. For example, you probably see that exercise abuse. A lot of the time, sometimes people train as a form of psychological and physiological fatigue, in the sense that maybe they're hurting, maybe they're dealing with something and they want to feel that element of pain. You want to feel that, that hardship, or you maybe want to physically feel how you feel emotionally. Sometimes that's a big thing for people. Maybe they're feeling that element of hurt. Maybe they've lost someone. Maybe they're feeling down and out on themselves. So, they want their physical feeling to feel how they feel inside. Maybe. If you look at the chemical reactions, I think that's one thing that people forget when it comes to training. There's a huge physiological cause and effect that the body goes through. As I mentioned earlier, the HPA axis is just one of them. Look at the benefits of exercise for reducing cortisol, lowering heart rate, health, wellness. For males, increasing testosterone. For females, the benefits of physical exercise from a chemical reaction for your hormonal axes, for your physiological and hormonal health, psychological health, gut health, all those chemical reactions. That can transition into, for example, exercise as therapy. I, for one, 9 times out of 10, I love training in the gym. Do it every day. Or some Saturdays and Sundays. Most days I do something physically, enduring, whether going for a walk, whatever the case may be. But Monday to Friday, you can almost guarantee that I'm in the gym. A lot of the times, as I showed, 9 times out of 10, it's not always just for aesthetic appeal. A lot of the time, it's that one time in the day where I don't have to worry about work. I don't have to worry about anything else. And even if I am worried about stuff or working with stuff or busy, it's one time during the day where you can plug your headphones in, or you can just walk on the treadmill, or you run, or whatever the case may be. It can just be that one day where everything is just neutralized. It's that safe space. So also look at that. Some of these reasons, when you have clients come to you, regardless of the speciality that they are coming to you for, that time when they're exercising for you could be their therapy. That time when they're exercising with you could be the one time in their day where they are able to, have an element of understanding. So there's all these various different things. There's also that can transition into exercise and self-esteem. How many people, struggle mentally because of their own self-image? And if they could just see the benefits of exercise, maybe once they start exercising and they see the benefits, not just internally, but externally, all of a sudden, you're not just looking at the scale for argument's sake, but you're looking at yourself, and all of a sudden, maybe your legs have a little bit more definition, or, you're feeling a little bit more healthy, or, your pant size has gone down, or maybe gone up. Maybe your goal is to put on some mass, and all of a sudden you're needing to get slightly bigger clothes. There's a hell of a lot of that exercise is so integral within. It's not just about vanity. It's not just about, how can we get 20-inch arms and leg press 10 plates and all of these different things. Granted, there is an element of maybe self-esteem that comes from that. Maybe you are someone who, maybe the gym is the one place where, you feel quote unquote accepted. Maybe it's the one place where you can push yourself. And I also am a firm believer that gym and training, broad spectrumly, is the one thing that is the most like for like to life, in the sense that what you put in is what you'll get out. Very similar to life. What you put in is what you get out. And also, sometimes in the gym, it's not fair. It's not fair. You can be training for 10 years, doing everything right, eating the right meals, taking the right supplements, pre, intra, post-workout. You can be married to the gym. And someone who's trained for a year, or maybe not trained at all, can come in and lift double what you lift. Sometimes it's not fair. If you look at more from a bodybuilding point of view, you can attribute your whole life to being the best bodybuilder. And someone can come in with 1% of your experience and they can blow you away. Be that genetics, be that luck, be that whatever the case may be. It also shows life. So when we look at these and when you go through them, think exercise and anxiety, the benefits. of reducing anxiety from exercising, but also the anxiety that can come. As much as exercise can help reduce anxiety, it can also increase anxiety. If you're doing it as a profession, that's your workspace. Going and exercising is your bread and butter. How can you adequately, perform? If there's a day where you struggle to maybe get under the squat rack, or you feel something, or you know that it's going to be a big day, and how you perform in the gym that day will dictate whether you can perform on the weekend, whether your coach is going to say yes or no. What does that yield? Maybe you need to perform on the weekend. Maybe your sponsor is saying, hey, listen, we're giving you good money to perform. We need you to play. Now you're going into that exercise session and you're a little bit like, maybe you're recovering from an injury. You're a little bit nervous. You don't want to get injured again. And that's where being a coach, there's also an element of security that you need to be able to give your clients, but not BS. Nowhere here is saying that you need to tell your clients what you should or shouldn't do or should feel, but there's an element of that approach. But yes, Melo, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to say, to a certain extent, we can also introduce body dysmorphia. I wanted to ask how can we introduce that one here in this topic?
Well, that could be the first one: exercise and psychological well-being, self-esteem, exercise and self-esteem. Social dimensions. That's also a great one where body dysmorphia comes in. But I think an element of body dysmorphia, in some cases, maybe it can be a good thing. You're holding yourself to a higher standard, maybe, right? But it's all about that spectrum of how far do you go on either end? Is your quote unquote body dysmorphia, if you look at it from a dysmorphia, you're not really you seeing yourself in a different light. How many people who maybe we can see are visibly unhealthy? Maybe that's being they so far underweight, or maybe that they're so far overweight. They are visibly unhealthy, but they themselves do not see themselves in that light. You can do every single test. You can do a DEXA scan, you can do a blood glucose test, you can do an insulin test, you can do whatever. But they themselves cannot visualize that maybe that they need to lose a couple of pounds, or maybe they need to increase a couple of pounds. But then you also have the other side whereby maybe they're super full blown on, like they could be in immaculate physical shape, but they are so self-critical of themselves. Maybe that's a reflection of how they are in the real life. That's why I said the gym is something that is very transcending across life. There's all these different things on how exercise can integrate, into various different things. So it's not just one dimension, it's a spectrum.
True. I think it also leads back to the point of acceptance at the beginning, where I'd say acceptance is also important, because if you can accept the body that you are, yet maintaining a healthy outlook where you're not satisfied by where you are, but from the point where you accept where you are with the vision of, I want to build more body mass, I think that can be more impactful, and it can be more thing for you as far as like what your goals are and how you can reach them, even though currently you're not in a place where you necessarily want to be where you are. But yeah, I think that from that end, it's a very positive thing. Yeah.
No, for sure. And I think also that's also one thing. Nowhere says that you just have to blindly accept. I think we've also generated a bad notion as people whereby acceptance is far easier than standing up or not tolerating something. And what I mean by that is, just because someone says something to you and that the odds are against you doesn't mean that you need to accept that. Just because your client comes to you and they say that they feel X, Y, Z about this, doesn't mean that you as a coach have to accept that. But there is a happy medium of like, how much influence do we allow that acceptance to have? That's what I said. If we go back to the previous one, they are arguably all interchangeable, but be very careful on how much time, how much influence you give each specific factor. Because maybe in a specific situation, identification is the most important aspect in that flow. Maybe communication is the most important one. As I said, from a psychological and physical well-being, sometimes maybe the best form of training is no training. And if you've been married to that situation, or if you are an athlete, or if you are someone who prides yourself in the gym, maybe like myself, maybe some weeks the best form of training is to not train. And when I mean not training, that could be completely not training and giving your body a break. That could be going for a walk. That could be training more the mental side as opposed to the physical side. There's so many different things that come to training than just gut-wrenching squats and, skull-crushing chest press and meeting times on a stopwatch or performing, performance is not just gym related or performance related from that point of view. There's a ton of things from an internal point of view which can influence and dictate the level of your performance tenfold than we maybe give it credit to. Each individual is completely unique. Some people, you take the gym away, maybe they lose that purpose, and the gym was the one thing that they had that they could hold themselves accountable for. So there's so many different things. But guys, these are the things. I don't want to overhop all of this. We've been on the slide for quite a while. But these are just some things that we need to look at. But what I will say is, from this, we're now going to dive into more of we've looked at exercise and the physiological approach, but now we're going to go into the specific environments, such as environmental factors, 21st century clients, injury, age-specific, and then disabilities. So I'm just quickly going to grab some water. You guys can take a quick 5-minute break if you need to. I'm just quickly going to grab some water. I'm going to come back, and then we can smash out the next 4 or 5 sections. We can have a little bit of a conversation, and then we will be done for today. If you have any questions, we can address them when we get back. I'm just quickly going to get some water. It is quite hot here today, here in the Midlands, so I'm quickly going to grab that, and then we can crack on in 2 minutes' time. Cool beans. All right. Perfect. Any questions so far? Any questions? All good. All right. Cool. Let's crack on. Now, when we look at these, like, for example, environmental factors, environmental factors, I think, are not addressed effectively. And that's why I haven't put much information on the slide, is because they are so unique to each individual. But let's have a discussion on environmental factors. I don't think that we necessarily give it enough credit for the influence that the environment has on different individuals, but more so how important and how influential that environment can be, both for good and bad reasons. When you look at that as a coach, what type of environment are you providing for your client? What type of environment does your client maybe thrive better in? Now, you need to think to yourself what type of coach you want to be, because there's no point creating an environment for a client that is not authentic to you. Not every environment that a coach provides is going to be the correct environment for the client. That's based on you, whether you want to change your environment to suit other people. There's also some very influential coaches within the industry that their environment is their environment, and it's up to you whether you want to be a part of that environment. They're not going to change that environment to meet your requirements, but rather you pick the coach on the environment that they provide. So it is very interesting. And one thing that I'd also look at that as well is that you never know on the other side what environment that individual has come from. You don't know the environment that they have to endure day to day. Maybe they don't have the best home environment. That could be adult or younger individual. Maybe they don't have the best work environments and they're coming to you straight from work. And normally you have this bubbly, joyful, happy client, and they come to you and they don't want to talk. They don't want to discuss. They're a little bit moody. You know, these are all things that you're going to have to be able to deal with and then move on from, because you can't really, if you think about it, you can't really blame them, you know, because that's just life. But you also need to think, what is that service going to look like for yourself? I think a lot of the time we don't look at the environment that we want to generate for ourselves as coaches. We're so prone to trying to meet the environmental requirements of this client, and the next client. But how does that influence your coaching ability? If you're someone who functions more along the lines of that drill sergeant and coaching will start at this time. If you book me from 5 till 6, 5 o'clock, that's the moment that I start charging. You come to me at 5:15, you've lost 15 minutes. There's 45 minutes left that you can utilize my services. Not, oh no, I'm going to push my next client till 15:15, or, let's just do half an hour here to, you need to think to yourself, what standards are you going to set for your own service offering? And what does that look like? How are you going to be able to follow through on the standards that you set for yourself? So there's various different environmental factors, and those environmental factors can follow through to performance. Do you create an environment in which people feel that they can grow? Have you created an environment where people feel that they can be open, authentic, and honest? They can be their quote unquote true self. So there's various different environmental factors that influence performance. Exercise in its own right can create an environment, creates an element of healthy competition, can create an element of healthy progression. But remember, there's always two sides. You can always do too much. And what effect will that have? But you can also equally maybe underplay the importance of certain things. And how do we work our way through that? Any comments? Any questions? What are your guys' approach to environmental factors? Do you think we agreeing here? Do you think that there's more to it? Is environment just a state of mind? Is there actual substance to it? Whose responsibility is it to dictate the environment? In my opinion, I think the coach needs to dictate that environment. I think a lot of the time coaches underplay the influence on the environment. You know? Also, I also feel that maybe as coaches, not everything has to be blood, sweat, and tears. Even if you are a drill sergeant coach, you are still working with people, and you yourself are also an individual. It's also okay for you to have a bad day, believe it or not. That now doesn't mean that that breaks the conditions of professionalism. Just because you're not having a bad day, or just because you're having a bad day, doesn't mean now that you need to take away the influence of that training session or of that service offering to your clients. Just because you're having a bad day and you don't feel like sending out a program to your client doesn't mean that your client deserves to suffer the consequences of your environment. So there's so many different approaches. There's so many different reasons for or against different things. So do you see how these environmental factors, we may think that the environment is just something that is fluid. Maybe it is. But I definitely would not underplay the influence that an environment can have on A, the client, but B, the coach or the facilitator. Because you have to think about, what is the end goal? What is the end goal that I'm trying to achieve? If you are a coach and you want to be a cheerleader, and it's going to be Cameron's cheerleading group, and all you want to do is scream positive affirmation and motivation to your clients, and that's what they're coming to you for. They're not coming to you to train them. They're coming for you to tell them how amazing and incredible they are. Then cool beans. Set up that environment. So that's genuinely the environment that you want. If you're someone who all you want to do is just shout words of negative commentary and whatnot at your clients and let them know how irrelevant they are and how useless they are, then hey, build that environment for yourself. But if you're someone who wants to see growth, if you want to see something, you need to gauge what do you need to do that. I also agree that there's an element of honesty that you need to have with your clients. But where do you interject that? Each individual is going to be the same. Some person may want you to be blatantly honest with you. No, you look crap today. You look crap. We've been working for 4 months. We've been trying to get here. You told me that this is where you want to be in 3 months. We built a plan and you agreed. You agreed that you were going to give everything to get here. Now what's happened? You want me to be honest? You look crap. That may work for one client, but that approach may not work for the next person. So that's where this coaching approach, you need to be very honest with yourself and what you want to offer and how you want to communicate. Now, nowhere am I saying that you need to be rude. Nowhere that I'm saying that you need to be insulting. Nowhere am I saying that you need to be degrading, sorry. But you need to understand what is your client asking you for? What service are they signing up for? What service are you willing to provide? Right? I'm pretty sure in Louis' case, when he works with international acclaimed athletes, there has to be an element of transparency, honesty, and respect between both parties. Right? Because if you want to be the best in the world, it's going to have to be a give and take here. There's going to be days where I'm going to be your biggest cheerleader, and as a coach, you should always be the number one cheerleader in the confinements of the training circle. But you're also going to have to be the most honest individual. But are you able to be honest with yourself as a coach? The expertise of maybe Louis in this case, or Melo in your case, or Precious in your case, or Inga in your case. I hope I pronounced your name correctly. I do apologize if I didn't. But you need to be able to also be honest with what your expertise have. I'm a huge fan of bodybuilding. I'm a huge fan of all of that. But if I have someone who wants to be Mr. Olympia or be an Olympian, I don't have the experience of coaching anyone to that extent. Would I like to? Maybe yes. But if they are coming to me and they're saying to me, Cameron, I want you to help me win the Mr. Olympia as my coach. And I have not an ounce of experience in that case. What service am I selling? Because the day is going to come where that's going to catch up to me, where that little white lie of, yo, man, I'll be able to get you there is going to catch up with you. Now, there is no shame in saying that, hey, look, man, I'd love to help you, but you have to understand that I don't have the experience to that degree. But what I can promise you is I'll give you my very best. You've been honest. So now you can hold yourself accountable to the environment that you set for yourself. So also be very careful for yourself as a coach on what type of environment you create, because this copy and paste BS, the situation whereby we're using cookie cutter programming and we just giving everyone just one big program. Sign up with me and I'll help you get abs in 8 weeks. You know? There's also an element of professionalism that we need to have there. Now, I'm not saying that you can't help people get to abs in 8 weeks. That's not what I'm saying at all. What I'm saying is be very careful in the environment that you create. And that's where it becomes difficult, because if you're doing this as a profession, you also want to make money, right? Because let's not lie to ourselves here. There's also an exchange. You're asking them to put 100% in. You're asking them to deposit X into your bank account. So the environment also dictates what are you willing to do for that money, but what are they willing to do to get your service, etc., etc., and how can we be in that space? So also remember what you are holding yourself accountable to, considering the environment as well. I love the Springboks, right? I'm not rusty. I may think I'm rusty when I'm sitting on my couch or in the, in the pub or whatever the case may be. I may think that I'm rusty. I may think that I know what's best for the Springboks. But have I sat there as Rassie? Have I been a head coach of a team? Have I been in a position where I have to consider not just the 15 people on the field, but the overall 30 or 40-man squad? Maybe in certain instances, yes. But do you know what I mean? This is what I'm trying to say about the environment. You got to consider what are your end goals as a coach. Cool. Can we move on? Right. 21st century clients. I think arguably probably the best and worst clients you can probably have. I think the best clients, because I think the advocacy that is out there with regards to health and wellness has never been as high as it is there before. You have fitness influencers and whatnot making money that some people could only ever dream of. You have personal training getting a better reputation across all different individuals. Where before it was more seen like, okay, you're probably doing personal training because you take steroids and you're big and you have nothing else going for you in life. Right? Or now, being a personal trainer, hey, you're a health professional. You're helping people live better quality lives. You're contributing to the health and medical sector. Now, all of a sudden, people are a lot more aware about health and wellness and exercise and the benefits thereof. So there's all these other different approaches now, which has come from a 21st century exposure point of view, social media, as much as we can look at it for the pros and cons, but in this case, the pro is advocacy. But in that same breath, 21st century clients are probably our harshest critics. If you post something on social media or whatever, there's going to be 1 million people who agree with you and will send words of positive encouragement or whatever the case may be. But there's arguably, possibly also going to be 1 million other people who are going to cite articles and videos and whatnot about why what you're doing is completely wrong or irrelevant, or there's going to be words that are degrading and insulting because someone disagrees with you. So when we look at 21st century clients, it's arguably you're going to be working with some of the most informed people, but also granted probably some of the most opinionated individuals. That's also where it becomes difficult. Where does your ego lie as a coach? Are we going to put ourselves in a position whereby our clients can be open, honest, and transparent with us? Maybe are we going to create that environment, as we said before, where, granted, in this 21st century era, people are going to have opinions? Are we going to open it up for these individuals to have an opinion, to maybe challenge us on our training approaches? But that's also, there's a very thin line between having that honest, open communication and having them comment and having them completely rip to shreds your approach. Are you able to take the criticism? Are you not? Because someone's constructive criticism may seem to you that they have insulted you. That all is part of this 21st century client base. What about supplements? Where do we look at that? From a supplementation point of view, we can look at, something just like creatine, the amounts of people that think creatine is a steroid. There's all of these different aspects. So when we look at 21st century clients, I think it's a great opportunity, especially for younger people, getting them more into gym environments, exercise environments. I'm a big believer in that. I think a lot of youth mental health stems from lack of activity, stems a lot from lack of discipline. And I think exercise teaches you discipline. I think exercise teaches you self-reliance. I think exercise teaches you an element of strength, mental strength, physical strength. Because let's not beat around the bush here. I mean, like, if you exercise physically and the day before, let's say you're going on a 10K run or 5K run, and the night before you slam 2 pizzas, 2 burgers, and a McFlurry, that run the next day probably isn't going to be as enjoyable as you thought. That's where, like I said, exercise is such a true reflection on yourself, So, I do think that there's a lot when you look at how many young individuals partake in extramurals. are physically active, you know. So there's elements of good, there's also equally elements that are not so good. But when it comes to 21st century clients, it will probably be some of the most fulfilling work that you can possibly do, because you can influence a generation of individuals to prioritize health and wellness, not just physically, but mentally as well. You know, so let's not underplay the influence of 21st century clients. Any comments? Agreements? Disagreements? Everyone happy? Cool beans, lemon squeeze. Injury. Injury. Injured clients. I'm sure this is Mr. Louis' worst experience. Guys, whether we like it or not, in the sports, health and wellness space, injuries are going to occur, whether we like them or not. Whether we agree that they should be there or not be there, they are going to happen. And this goes all the way back to stress as well. If you have a stressful environment, if you have people that are under stress, if you have people who are running that sympathetic nervous system into the ground, they are redlining 24/7, 365. There's neurological inflammation there. There's physiological inflammation there. How on God's green earth do you expect anyone to recover effectively when the body itself is flatlining on the red scale? So when we look at injuries, we know that they're going to happen. We know that they're going to be there. But let's not discount the influence that stress also has on the recovery process. I will get to your question, Alu. When we look at all of that, I think we also need to look at ourselves as coaches and look, when we think of injuries, that as much as we know that they can and probably will happen, how do you work through that space? Again, where does your ego lie? Are you going to allow that clients of yours, are you going to put trust in a bio, a physio, and have full confidence that that client will maintain your service post medical intervention? Especially in the personal training space, where nowadays more and more bios and physios, probably in an element of financial security, are also offering more personal training elements. If you look at some chiropractors, there's also, in the chiro space, they're also offering rehabilitation programs, maybe personal training programs. Everyone, you know, utilizing personal training where they can. But ultimately, the athlete comes first. Ultimately, I think we need to look at the athlete. It comes first, and we need to be able to, ourselves as coaches, take a back seat, look at these various different elements of how the environment that we allow our clients to be in with that. Are we just going to, okay, cool, you're injured, let me know when you can pay my 1,000 Rand an hour fee again? You know, where does it work? And that's where, unfortunately, the higher you go up the professional pyramid, the more difficult it becomes. Because if you look at a team, if you look at like rugby, when a player gets injured, or at professional sport, when someone gets injured and that is what they do for a living, as a coach, that's an awfully difficult position to be in, because there's so many different stresses that are coming from so many different environments. I mean, like, heck, you know, as we mentioned earlier, you get injured, but you have your rugby union telling you, hey, listen, we have you on a R2 million a year contract when you playing again. But you know for a fact you've spoken to the orthopedic surgeon, you've spoken to the physios, the buyers and whatnot, and they've told you, listen, man, this is a 4-month injury. But in the back of your mind, you also have your agent. Hey, listen, hey, Puma's on the phone. Puma's asking, hey, when are you doing another ad campaign? When you back on the field? We're paying you 20 grand a month to wear our boots, but you're not going to play for 4 months. We need you to make that 4 months 2.5, 3 months. Athletes get tempted, where you now start to look beyond medical intervention. You start to look at maybe that that testosterone and that GH and that IGF starts to look very, very attractive. TB 500 and BPC 157 isn't enough. I need to get back faster, quicker. All of a sudden, you know, you become a walking, talking pharmacy. These are elements, and maybe you as a coach, maybe you have the star athlete. Your business is built on having the number one athletes in the world, the number one rugby player, the number one sprinter, the number one cyclist, the number one, you name it. Your whole business is built on you being associated with this athlete. And if that athlete isn't in the limelight, that athlete doesn't go to world champs, if that athlete doesn't perform on the Olympia stage or whatnot, your business and relevance, because times move so quickly with social media, is dependent on that. Where do you now, like again, as I said, ego with regards to injury, where do we now place ourselves with our business as an approach? Very, very difficult, very, very difficult with still dealing with the injury. And then are we going to be patient enough to take our clients through the adequate rehabilitation program and be honest with them in that space and create an honest space where I need you to buy into this? We know how quickly bodies can adapt to a new state of normal, especially with knee injuries, for argument's sake. If you don't move your knee for a week, I challenge you to try and bend your knee. Even for a week. Have you ever slept with your arm straight or something like that and you have to bend it in the morning and you're like, yes, that's painful. That's just a couple of hours. You know, never mind any potential surgical or, you know, other forms of trauma that have occurred on the site of injury. So all these different things. Injury is so complex. And then yourselves, you know, the athletes in that, how can they trust the other medical intervention? Are you yourself trusting? You know, there's so many people nowadays because there's this abundance of information. There's this abundance of coaching expertise. There's an abundance of medical expertise out there that, you know, when you look at all of this stuff there, you know, are you going to put yourselves in a position to respect the professional opinion of someone else as well? And within that, are you going to have the foresight to be able to be honest with that feedback? And where do you draw the line of just blindly accepting whatever that response is? And where do you maybe think, you know what, 1 + 1 isn't necessarily equaling 2 here? We've done ultrasounds, we've done scans, and it's a grade 1 hamstring injury, but you have a trigger happy orthopedic who now is saying, now I'm going to have to reattach the hamstring and I'm contacting the uncle to use part of their hamstring so that it's you know, an adequate, you know, replacement or whatever the case. You know what I mean? Like all of a sudden people are trigger happy because, you know, they see someone who maybe they can utilize financially. Now, granted, I'm using an extreme example. I'm not saying every orthopedic surgeon is someone who's trigger happy to cut, but these are different aspects. Or maybe the orthopedic has said, look, as much as we look at this as being a grade 1 or a grade 2 injury. Looking at their injury history and how many strains they've had, it would be more beneficial for the client to have an operation, a more minimally invasive procedure now, and put them out for 2 months or 3 months, but then they have a bigger chance of having a less injury prone career going forward. There's all these different responses, and where you as a coach, where do you put yourself? You know, the same as for more general population clients, someone comes in, they're feeling good. They've only squatted a max of 1.5 plates each side. They come in and they tell you, no, my mate did 3 plates. I want to do 3 plates today. Yeah, dude. That's great in principle, but you struggled on doing 5 reps for 1.5 plates and you now want to do double that. What do we as a coach now do? You know, like, I mean, hoorah to you, dude. I want you to be able to go arse to grass with 3 plates, but that may not be the most practical solution. But hey, let's start with getting you to 2 plates today. And maybe at the end of your squat session, hey, if you want to try and do a 1 rep max on 3 plates, you know, we can get, you know, let's make sure that you're primed and ready, and let's try. But where are we going to do that? How are we going to do that? But yeah, any feedback? Louis, you raised your hand earlier. Sorry, excuse me for being rude there.
Yeah, no problem, Cameron. I think there's some valuable lessons and points that you've actually mentioned. In my field of expertise, it's quite important, even when a client comes, and especially athletes, you know, they want to be sprinters or they want to be middle distance athletes. It's very important for me to, you know, step back first, do a proper assessment. And I know we mustn't go outside the scope of what we know, but you know, for me, it's very important to understand the athlete to understand how the mechanics work of running, and to understand that if your driving leg is moving more into an internal position the whole time, the possibility would be a knee injury or a hip injury, or, you know, and those are the things that we first have to eliminate. And make stronger the biokinetic side of the body to align that, before we can go to the next phase of trying to put you on a 10-meter sprint flat out, because, you know, the force that it generates out of the blocks, it's extreme. It's 3 times your body weight. And the type of force it puts onto your nerve system is extremely high. So and when you think about these things, people think it's, well, everybody can run, everybody can sprint, and there will no injury occur during the training. So for me, you know, I've really seen a lot of athletes lose their, can I say, the goal of what they want to achieve, their dreams, because of coaches not really doing the proper assessments with them, warm them up properly, and build up according to what you want to do for the day in the session. So if I make an example, if I want a guy to sprint today at 50 meters, then I know that it's going to use a lot of leg movement. So what we are going to warm up more is the legs, to prepare them for that explosive power out of the blocks, drive into the first 30 meters, you know, and work on that. And then a warm-up can take up to 20 minutes. You know, people do it in 5 minutes and say, okay, it's just getting your heart rate up and make you sweat a little bit, and then you're ready. But it's more than that. So I think the preparation to get a person into the workout is important, because for instance, I'm saying, if I talk about the long jump athlete, number 1 in South Africa that I've coached, she's done in a season over 7,000 jumps, and I'm not just talking about just jumping into the pit, but, you know, little hops, little side steps, a little bit one leg hopping, those type of things. It's all calculated into it, but it's preparing her to land into the sand, is to making sure
Yeah.
that the force that she applies to the ground is ensuring that she doesn't injure her calves
Mhm.
or injure a hip.
Yeah.
And so there's 3 to 4 months of preparation before we get to the actual point of landing in the sand. So landing in the sand for most of my athletes, they've in a season 7 times, 8 times before
Yeah.
we go to competition. But the most important thing is to prepare them and make sure that they go through the season without the injury, because you can't sit with injury in the season, because it takes weeks for it to at the end of the day to fix it. And sometimes you can have an athlete, and thank God that I've never had serious injuries in my life, but I had a lot of athletes that comes to my practice with injuries that we first have to solve and resolve and sort out,
Yeah.
and seeing what is the underlying issue. And if it's not in my scope, I refer them. I say go to a biokinetics or physiotherapist and sort it out, and come
For sure.
once a week, come to the training session, and let's work on that. But until you're ready, we're not going to apply any force. We're not going to do serious stuff. I would rather work in a pool with you than putting on a track and that type of force on your body if you're not ready and prepared for it. So that's just my 5 cents of information or experience I want to add to your conversation.
No, for sure. And I also think just to tie into that, I think one thing that we as coaches sometimes need to remember is there's a cause and a reaction effect that happens. And I'm not sure what everyone else's interest or whatever it may be. Let's take bodybuilding, for example. If you want to generate a physique, there's going to be an element of training that generates that physique, right? If you want to be on, for example, the highest of highs on the Mr. Olympia stage, and you want to have blown out quads with hamstrings that are hanging to the floor, I'm sorry to say, but if you think that you're going to grow those hamstrings by running 10Ks and doing air squats and playing paddle on the weekend and all of that, probably not going to grow you hamstrings and quads that are going to be of that element of performance. The same as when I've worked with rugby players and the rugby players that I do work with, you need to be able to understand what does your position require. So if you look at that from an injury point of view, a lot of the time, if you look at our front rowers, if you look at all of that, they are being injured because they aren't being trained in the gym to be strong at what their job is. How many front rowers do neck exercises? Do they even know what a neck exercise is? How many of them have a strong neck? Granted, some of them will have a strong neck just from playing prop or playing hooker, but how many of them train their necks? But yet, guaranteed 10 to 15 times a game, they're at the bottom of a scrum with their neck like this. So we need to be more intentional with our training as well. When an individual comes to you, and this is where being honest, like Louis said, with how many times his long jumpers may actually land in the sand, you first need to learn to walk before you can learn to run and then sprint or whatever the case may be. And that's where maybe we as ourselves as coaches need to look at where does our expertise lie. So same as if I have a young lady coming to me and she wants me to prep her for a show, do I have experience of working with females? Do I have experience knowing the female hormonal arc? Do I have experience of, let's say they want to reach the highest of highs? Do I have experience in understanding how PEDs, should they be introduced, affect a female's fertility as well? Do I have experience in how these anabolics play a role physiologically, but also neurologically? What does science say? What are their blood levels? Because I can throw all these fancy terms out. I can say, oh, we're going to run a blood panel on this, and we're going to do, you know, I need you to spend $5,000 at Lancet and do this and do that. Do you know how to read a blood panel? Because yes, you can read a blood panel and it can say the normal area is this to this, but do I understand why her or his levels are at a specific level? Do I understand what inflammatory markers are, why they are there? Maybe they are there because of a certain response that I'm not taking into account. There's all these different things, but also specific training for a specific profession. If you have a scrum half or a fly half and you have a prop and they're squatting, should they both be squatting the same? Probably not, no. A scrum half, you need to be explosive. You need someone to be able to generate force in a different, you know, range of motion. A prop, do you really need him going all the way arse to grass and all the way up? No, you want him to be strong in that position. You want him to be strong in that, you know, scrumming position, because that's his job. Same as athletes, maybe that you work with, Louis. Strength and conditioning coaches need to be more intentional in what does the coach look for from the athlete? What does it need? I don't need my 1500 meter squatting 200 kilos in the gym. You also need to look at risk to injury, white muscle fiber to red muscle fiber, A and B type. What am I asking from an injury and an inflammatory response of that? I'm asking my 1500 meter runner to squat 200 kilos, then I'm going to ask him to run 10 Ks. How long is that hamstring going to last? How long is that quad going to last? So there needs to be a form of integration that is there. And the same as with more your gen population clients as well, guys. Like, hold yourself to a higher standard, and equally then you can hold your clients to that higher standard that you have set for yourself. Nowadays, unfortunately, everybody wants to be a coach. Everyone wants to be a professional in the space. And as you've said before, that's amazing. We can help change more people's lives, get more people healthy, etc., etc. But if you hold yourself to a higher standard, by all means, you will be able to blow a lot of the people in the industry away. And you'll be able to offer a slightly more premium service. But if you yourself cannot hold yourself to a standard within your own right, you're never going to be able to do that. And that's where a lot of these injuries happen. A lot of these injuries happen when we aren't able to be honest with clients with where they are at. But equally, a lot of them happen when we can't be honest with ourselves with where our expertise begin and end. You know, I may work with neurosurgeons, but there's no way that I'm going to be cutting someone's brain. You know, I may be there in theater and I can have a conversation. Hey, you know, the mechanism of action for most of this is going to be that. What are your thoughts? I'm not the one removing the tumor. That's their expertise. I'm not going to educate a neurosurgeon on how they should or shouldn't do that. The same as I'm not going to tell Louis that, you know, his athlete should be extending more or whatever the case may be. But I'm sure Louis and I can have a conversation about, hey, what's your approach? Let me understand better. What is your client's approach? How is that? And we can learn from one another, and maybe he can learn something from me and I can learn something from him. But I'm not going to go into that and tell him, hey, listen, you know, like whatever you think you're telling your client is, you know, we also need to be able to have an element of respect. So when it comes to injuries, there's more than just the injury itself. There's the whole environment. There's the whole pre, intra, and post-injury spectrum and timeline, which you are equally a part of. Any further comments apart from Louis? Because he has commented, I want to see this. Anyone else have any comments? No. Perfect. All right. Let's just move on to age-specific training. Age-specific training. Guys, please. This is very, very important. I think more so on both sides of the spectrum when we look at training. I personally don't feel that anyone under the age of 16, in some cases, maybe even 14, 13, should be doing bodybuilding-esque exercises. I think children should be healthy. I think they should be running around. I think they should understand the basic principles of exercises, doing push-ups, doing air squats, doing sit-ups. Understand the basic principles of exercise, swimming and that. But I don't think that at 13, 14 years old, there should be these children that are so focused. I'm not saying it's bad, but so focused on going and doing a leg press, going and doing a deadlift, going and doing a squat. Granted, I think they can work up towards doing that, and there is elements within that, and where phys ed and all of that are really important to their overall physical and also mental development. But this notion whereby we're creating a push-pull leg split for a 14-year-old, I mean, you could do some serious damage in that case. You could do some serious damage in that case to overall progression and physical longevity. The same as with older people, right? You need to understand where that individual is. Just because they say to you they want to lose weight, now you're putting them on a high rocks exercise. Now you're having old ladies and old men, trying to get them to do this, that, and the next thing you're putting them, they have the mobility of 0 point something, but you're asking them to do squats on a Smith machine, ass to grass. You're asking old ladies to load up on the barbell bench press and getting them to do bench press. Now, I'm not saying that bench press isn't the problem here. Squats aren't the problem here. Barbell movements aren't the problem. Smith machines aren't the problem. It's looking at the individual and what is going to be the best for them. That is where we need to look at that. And how can we generate that best response? It's the same as how many people, unfortunately, look at pregnant women, right? Pregnant women. Do you guys know what diastasis recti is? Anyone? Well, diastasis recti is when a woman is pregnant, you have the umbilical albicans, or in your abdominal wall, that's the middle lining of your abs. What happens in some pregnant women, diastasis recti, is where the abdominal wall separates like that. Why? To provide space for the fetus, right? And to open up. Now, as much as pelvic floor movements are great for pregnant women, if you're now going and you're telling them, oh no, by the way, you got to do hanging leg raises because, we want to make your core strong. Now you have a state of diastasis recti. What are you going to do to that abdominal wall? So you need to be very careful of age-specific training, looking at where they are, take into consideration arthritis, mobility. It's great to start and where, I'm not saying that all these older individuals need to be in the Virgin Active pool doing YMCA and all of that, and dancing to Neil Diamond and ABBA and all of that in the water. I think it's great for them to get moving. But there's also a lot more beneficial exercises that they could be doing. Running is not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing. But then in your pre-scanning or in your initial consult with them, what's their heart rate? What's their cortisol? Or not cortisol, but more cholesterol? Looking at all of those factors. When last did you have a checkup? What are all these different things? Because if you don't know that your client has a pacemaker, they're struggling with high cholesterol, they're on blood thinners or whatever the case may be, and you're now telling them that, right, today we're going to do a half an hour on the ergo machine or the rowing machine, and then we're going to be doing, a little bit of a circuit workout. Risk to reward with that. So age-specific training, very, 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 very important. In that same breath, we are in an age where the professional entry level, if you want to call it that, is getting younger and younger and younger. We now have professional footballers at 16 years old. 16 years old earning 150,000 euros a week. Who would have thought, eh? 16 years old. Now, there's a whole other approach to that as well. But if we look at it from a physical point of view, they are now being introduced into gyms and to coaching and whatnot at a far younger age. Now, when they need to be able to perform, it does get difficult because if you need them to develop, let's say, their legs, if you look at from a science-based point of view, why wouldn't we make them do squats? Why wouldn't we put them on a leg press? Why wouldn't we have them do more of these more, hypertrophic-esque or bodybuilding-esque exercises that can yield that response? Why wouldn't we? If we know that those exercises and the yield that they give from a growth and performance point of view is X, why wouldn't we do them then? So it puts you in this very, with the professional landscape being far, vast now, makes it very, very interesting. But Louis, you have your hand raised. And also on that, Louis, if I can ask a question, which maybe you can let us know. How do you work with your younger clients that are maybe younger from a physical element of view? And where do you yourself view the gym and exercises within that space from a professional point of view as well?
Thanks, Cameron. I think the most important thing for me is the program part of developing an athlete. Specifically, athletes' development from the age of 8 up to 16, the central nervous system is playing an extremely important role in developing as well the muscle growth with that. And this is why, in my personal experience, I will never, ever, ever, ever let a 16-year-old female or a male, but specifically a female, not run a 400-meter competition. For the mere fact that it's so much training, the whole body. It's such a much force on the CNS system, and they are not ready for that. I would rather most of my athletes start on the age of 17 to actually compete in the 400s. I would rather focus on the 100s and the 200s to build a very good base of a speed endurance for them before we go actually to running a 400-meter race. And I've seen success out of that, and especially in weight training as well. It takes a very about 3 years for an athlete to build a proper form and also a proper technique base for moving over into a weight room, especially on the younger ages. There's two things that I believe in. The first thing is mobility. It's the most important thing of an athlete because you can't run fast if you're stiff. And the second thing is that you need to focus a lot on speed. Speed, because speed you can develop. You're not born with it. And especially if we have to talk about cultures and all that, and we can have a big discussion on it as well. But for me, it's building a base of understanding what you're doing, focusing on that, what is important, and build a very good house, because you can only start to put up the roof when you're on the age of 19 or 20. So if your base is not strong enough, you can't put up the roof. You can't run a 46 or a 47 on a 400. You cannot do a 10.6 or a 10.5 on a 100 if your base is not good. And this is what the challenge that I have with athletes that they come to the track, and then you hear they come from a gym session where they had to put weight on there's a nerve system. I don't train them. I said, you know what, the best thing is go home and recover, and try to stay away from the gym. You know, you can use the gym. Yes, you can do box step ups, and you can do plank, and you can do push-ups, and you can do back raises. You can do all those stuff that is body orientated. But as soon as you are putting the force on your body, you know, you're working against your own body, and you're working against the weight that you are putting on your body. And that is breaking a lot of areas. Your psychological part, you know, a child will get negative because they put so much pressure on themselves because they want to perform, and they don't understand that lactate is taking 36 hours for them to get out of the body. And so they do a hard gym session. The next day they're doing sprinting like crazy. So you've got 2 hard sessions, and then or 3, sometimes 3. When is your body getting that recovery? So my methodology that I actually believe in is training like the cats. That I call it. All my athletes know that if we have an hour program, you train only 1 minute, because most of that you must rest, you must recover. It takes a lot of time for your body to actually put back all the ATP and TPs and whatever that you want to call it back into your system so that you can perform in the next rep. And that's why it's so important for me as an athlete to have the concept of rest more and to do more. Develop your mobility, develop your speed, because there's a set up to 13 years old. After that, it's impossible. It's not impossible, but it's extremely difficult to develop speed. But because there's a window for developing a sprinter, it's from the age of 7 till 13. After that, it's set. It's set. The base is set. And if you don't develop that in a very young age, you're going to struggle later on to get where you need to be. And I've seen it with some athletes, you know, when they come in, they've been through the gym. Daddy believes in that. They must go to the gym because we were in the gym and nothing happened with us. But it's athletics itself, in my personal opinion, is a science. And if you understand the science, you will create good, fast athletes. And that is what is important for me when developing athletes.
No, thank you very much. Anyone else have anything else to add in that sense? Anyone involved in the bodybuilding community? Anyone? No? Anyone involved in the Hyrox community? Anyone involved in CrossFit? Or are you guys just all just avid gym goes? Just go to the gym, check in, check out? Mello, so you're check in and check out?
Yes.
At the moment,
Oh,
yeah.
Okay. Look, I think, guys, everything, if there's one thing that when it comes to age-specific training in general, is your ability to recover. Because you can look at the biggest athletes in the world. Okay, let's take one that we probably all know. Let's take Jesse Creel. He's built like a Greek god. Right? Like, if any, like, he's probably, for most females, incredibly attractive, but for most males, he's probably envied by most males because he just like he slaps on muscle like it's nothing, right? But the point being, go and look at what he does. Go look at his social media. He's endorsed by some of the biggest recovery brands in the world. Go look at what they do. Go look at how much time they spend on recovery. Do you think that they are sponsored by those hyperbaric chambers and those big compression sleeve companies just because they have nothing better to do on a Saturday evening than lie on the couch with those compression bands and those compression, air sleeves? All of this, yes, where they perform is on the biggest stage. But if they are not able to recover effectively, nowhere near there. And Louis touched on a very important thing that I mentioned earlier, is the brain. Your sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system response. This goes throughout life. This is not just training. That's why what I've tried to say throughout this whole special considerations lecture is you can attribute what we've said here and apply it to life. You'll probably get a similar response. When you look at the brain, and what I do with some, even corporate execs, I do it with high performance athletes and that, I test their central nervous system. And it gives me back a response from where they're sitting from the sympathetic to parasympathetic division. Within that, I'm also able to see the fatigue on their heart, but also the fatigue on their brain. So I run the fundamentals of an EEG and an ECG, right? And they give me windows of trainability. Now, let's go away from athletics. Let's look at something that is more popular in that sense. If you look at rugby or corporate exec, let's take a corporate exec, someone that's not necessarily intrinsically in the physical space. I test someone and they score low. So they're very high sympathetic dominant. So they're very high stress. Let's say their heart rate is slightly elevated. But we can see from their brain energy point of view, it is very low. It's hyperactive, but brain energy low. If you look at that individual, I can guarantee you that if they are able to go from that sympathetic state to more of a balanced sympathetic, parasympathetic division, now I'm saying that fight or flight is bad, but if you stimulate that all the time, well, it is going to be a bad thing. But if we are able to get them further towards balanced, if we are able to get the brain to be more energized, if we are able to balance that out, you will have a much better performance and you'll become a much better asset to yourself in your workspace than if you were to keep flatlining. You see, because our brains are so clever, you'll wake up in the morning and regardless of the stress, you'll continue going to work because that's what you tell yourself you need to do. I have to go to work. Whether I like it or not, I have to wake up at 6 or 5 because I need to get to work by this time. And you have to do that because we need money to pay for water, for lights, for electricity. But if you do not focus on the elements of recovery, there's only so long you're going to be able to go before you burn out. And I can say from personal experience, burnout is some of the hardest thing to deal with because you literally have to change. You're not going to be able to. So when you look at all of this recovery, my point being is that recovery is so important, but that does not mean that you do not work hard. That does not mean that now you give your clients a hall pass to do nothing. Like what Louis was saying, if he could choose, he would say not go to the gym session before coming to one of his sessions. He's not saying that the gym is bad, but if your priority is to train athletics today, don't go to the gym before. Come and train athletics. That's what we're training today. If you say, hey, Coach Louis, I think I need to get a little bit more stronger. Maybe he'll say, hey, I need your quads to have a little bit more muscle. We need more force. We need more power. We need more drive. We need more this. Your core maybe is too weak. You're not able to run in the right biomechanical position because your core is weak. I need you to go to the gym and we need to have a chat with the SNC to get you stronger. Then yes, that program will be catered to what you're going to do. But within the more general population thing, you need to look at how able they're going to be able to respond. That's why I said that environmental factor. Sometimes it's better when they come in and you can see that today isn't going to be the day. Maybe you get up, you're so excited, you know that today's leg day, you're going to know they're going to get a PB, you know that it's going to be a big day for them and they've been working hard towards it. Sometimes it's easier to just say, or it's better to say, look, so-and-so, let's just go have a coffee today. I can see it's just not going to work today. I can see that you've had a bad day. I can just tell by the way that you're talking. Look, if they say, no, it's fine, I really want to do it, hey, they're the client. Sometimes you need to be able to, it's a give and take. If they're paying you for that session and they want to do something, then you can also pass it off, okay, cool, we'll do legs, but we're going to do a little bit more of a circuit-based thing, very low in, very high intensity, low, weight bearing, etc. Maybe there's elements of that, but sometimes just humanizing things, guys, is huge when it comes to age-specific things. I don't know about you guys, but I'm not a robot. Sometimes I have bad days. Sometimes you guys are going to have bad days. And this notion of how life is meant to be this perfect upward trend is something that we need to stray away from, because that's not the case. If you look at the biggest people in the world, the biggest, most successful individuals in the world, I can guarantee you that they've failed more times than they've been a success. They've had more days where they weren't okay than days when they are okay. Now, I'm not saying that now we need to create a generation or a group of people whereby, heck, everyone is walking around with their lip on the floor and we're all feeling sorry for ourselves. That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm saying that when it comes to age-specific training, when it comes to special considerations in general, there's a lot more factors that you take into consideration, excuse the pun, rather than just straight up just training aspects. So general population, sports specific, high performance, you name it. Age is also going to be a very important factor. Now, the last one for today, guys, is disabilities. I think it's very important when we look at disabilities to understand the disability, educate yourself on the disability, but also understand how the disability was caused. For example, if you look at people who have physical disabilities in the sense that maybe they don't have a limb or whatever, or they have a prosthetic or whatever the case may be, you need to be able to understand how the body is now accounting to balance out the exercise that you are now asking them to do from a training point of view. For example, not the latter part of his current life, but if you look at Oscar, right? His training from a physical and maybe gym and S&C point of view would not be the same as his fellow able-bodied competitors. It can't be. Even though he was running with his prosthetics and with his blades, there's no way that you generate force the same. There's no way. Even if you look from the bottom up, if you look from his calves, his tibialis, his all of those different muscles giving support and drive off of the ground, he wasn't doing that. So how can you create a program and how can you train someone exactly the same? Now, when you look at disabilities, I arguably think that you need to acknowledge the disability, but don't let it distract you from what you're trying to do. I think far too many times when it comes to disabilities, we all of a sudden freeze, and now all of a sudden we put the disability on a pedestal. And we arguably treat our clients slightly different because there's this disability or whatever the case may be. Remember, they are just as able in their mental approach as anyone else. So let's not be prejudicial when it comes to orchestrating a program, because when it comes to disabilities, they still want to see results. They still want to be able to do this. Just because they maybe don't have a leg or they're in a wheelchair or whatnot doesn't mean that they don't want to see some form of progression. So in that same breath, who are we to put limits on what they can or can't do? I do think you need to be able to have a rational approach to it. I do think you need to be able to be slightly more empathetic to their approach and understand what they are trying to achieve. But in that same breath, don't limit what you think they can or can't do. Because you'd be awfully surprised with the tenacity that a lot of disabled athletes and disabled people in general have. And I mean, if they're coming to you to work, if they're approaching you for you to help them, do you know how much courage that must take? You know, I mean, just try maybe for one day. Just put your arm in your shirt and pretend you don't have an arm and try and compete all the daily exercises and things that you do. Or just tonight when you brush your teeth, try brush with the opposite hand. Most of us will like try and brush our teeth, and half the toothpaste will end up on the mirror, and we'll be screaming 4-lettered words before we even leave the bathroom. But here's someone who, despite or in spite of their disability, they are coming to you to improve their health, their wellness, and their physical stature. So disabilities are a very special approach, but I definitely think it is a slightly more professional approach in that you need to be able to understand the injury. You need to be understanding how, from a anatomical point of view, the prosthetics, if prosthetics are involved, are assisting the individual. What can they do? What can't they do? Various different exercises there that you can get them to do without putting too much strain or in positions. And just getting through, an element of a block, and how can you adequately quantify their performance? You're not going to be able to, in some cases, do 1-rep maxes. So what's going to be the new baseline for progression? How are you going to cater that program to ensure that progression is there? How are you going to ensure, from a baseline testing point of view, what are going to be your markers that you're going to look at? An overall approach. So I really do think that disabilities are a special thing, and not something that we should just, look over and be like, well, we're just going to do the bare minimum. We just want to just get them through. Hey, the sky's the limit for them just as much as it is for us. So let's just be mindful of that. Not too much we can really add on from a special consideration point of view with regards to disabilities, because they are very much disability specific. But what I would say, though, is everything that you probably are going to think of from a mental fortitude point of view or a mental fatigue point of view, best believe they've probably thought of 10 times over. Every single struggle that you're going to think that they are possibly enduring, they probably endured 10 times over. So that's also, I think, a lot of the time, I think it comes down to a respect point of view. I think that majority, 99.9% of the time, most people address people with disabilities with respect. But let's not place limits on them. Let's, if anything, remove limits and show them that the sky is also the limit for them, especially for quadriplegics or individuals maybe dealing with like cerebral palsy, autistic individuals. Understand them, and I think that's really where communication comes in. I think communication is a big thing. And I think when you're working with disabled clients, I think a lot of the time that communication is going to do more than whatever program you create, whatever structure, whatever training you put there. The communication side is probably going to be the most important thing, enabling them to trust you, but you creating a environment where they can thrive and be transparent in. And I think that's really the one that ties it in there. So, guys, that is special considerations. Any comments on the disabilities? Any comments on today? Overall, let's just close this up, and then once I end the recording, if there's anything personal in specific to yourselves that you may need assistance with, we can have that. But thank you guys for joining today. If there are any questions, feel free. Anyone? No. Are you guys all new? I don't think I've lectured you guys before.
I started, I don't know, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, no, I started, I signed up August this year. So this is my first online tutor.
Oh, not sure. As I said to Louis, I created a YouTube channel where all the other classes that we've done before,
I've
you
done
can
them.
go and rewatch. Okay, so you can also
Yes,
look
thanks.
there. So you can also look at that. And look, guys, look, these sessions aren't meant to be lectures. These sessions aren't, these are primarily to go through the broad content that you're going to be doing, but it's mainly just to interact. It's mainly just to touch base and share knowledge with one another while going through the content and different approaches that we're going to have. So that's really what today has been on. If there is anything that you guys would like to touch base on or further, definitely. But for a large portion of it, if you guys don't have anything, you're more than welcome to crack on with your Saturday. With whatever you're going to do, just please be safe. Box aren't playing today, but there's a hell of a lot of South African teams in the URC. You can watch there. Pollard is back with the Bulls, so you can see what he's going to do today. But so there's a lot of good things there. But guys, look, all that I will say within the health and wellness space is you have such an ability to change people's lives, change your own life, really. But it all starts with being honest. All starts with being honest with yourself, what do you want to achieve and how you're going to achieve it. There's genuinely, you're not going to have any benefit lying to yourself, lying to clients, cutting shortcuts, all of that. But if you choose to pursue this industry, it is unfortunately incredibly flooded in South Africa. This industry is incredibly flooded in South Africa. But the cream rises to the top. The cream rises to the top. So I encourage you all to expect more of yourself. Always, I think we can always expect more of ourselves, but to also just believe in yourself, really. And just give it your best crack. So as we work through some of these sessions, I think we only have 2 more for the year, 2 or 3 more for the year. So I look forward to seeing you guys in those. But as always, please, more than welcome to contact me. But your main line is to contact first your tutors. They are there to help you. But should they not be able to assist, or if you have any questions for me specifically, more than welcome to pop me an email or whatever the case may be.
Thank
Cool
you.
beans. Only a
Thank you.
pleasure. Hope you guys have a great day, and I'll see you guys in the next one.
Thanks, Cameron.
Thank you. Thanks,
Cameron, can I
Cameron.
just
Yeah.
Cameron, can I just share something with you afterwards,
Yeah.
please?
Yeah, sure.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye, Inga.
Cheers.
Bye,
Bye.
Nilo.
Cheers.
Bye, Precious.
Guys.
Okay, I have stopped the